Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar on how civil services can become more responsive to changing public needs. I'm Matt Ross, Editorial Director of the publishing house Global Government Forum, which serves civil servants around the world. I'm afraid you'll have to excuse my croaky voice and fuzzy brain today. The schools are back and with them the procession of colds that children bring home with them. Today, we'll be talking about how civil servants and national public sector bodies can evolve to respond more rapidly and flexibly in a world of ever faster and more disruptive change. In many countries, people are becoming both more disillusioned with their governments and more demanding, expecting accessible, convenient public services built around their needs. But meanwhile, the complexity, scale and unpredictability of the challenges facing governments keep on growing. Economies, societies, environments and technologies are changing rapidly, and we're seeing lots of disruptive events like pandemics, natural disasters, social unrest and cyber attacks. So civil services need to become more nimble and adaptive, able to quickly identify emerging threats, apply the right skills and resources, and reshape policies and services. This isn't so much about building new systems as about ensuring that our systems constantly renew themselves, reflecting changing public policy goals, emerging threats and elected leaders' priorities. The webinar will begin with presentations from our three panelists, but we aim to save about 45 minutes for questions. So this is your chance to put your questions to our panel and have them answered in person. As questions occur to you, just click on the Q&A button at the foot of your Zoom window and type them in. I'll keep an eye on that window and we'll get through as many audience questions as possible. Please do add a note if you don't want me to use your name as I put the question. So our panel. Today we have the civil service reform and transformation leads from two really interesting countries. Singapore, a world leader in fields such as talent management and digitally enabled public services. And the UK, which is embarking on a fresh round of civil service reforms following Boris Johnson's re-election last year. We'll hear first from Teo Sin Woon, the Deputy Secretary Transformation in the Public Service Division of Singapore's Prime Minister's Office. Zin oversees civil service transformation and workforce development across the government, helping to integrate services, develop digital technologies and strengthen public engagement. Next, we will have Alex Richards, a managing consultant at our knowledge partner PA Consulting, whose support enables us to offer this webinar free of charge to public servants. Alex has spent years delivering big, complex technology-enabled government programs and leads the firm's adaptive work around the world. And third, we will have Caleb Deeks, the Programme Director for Civil Service Modernisation and Reform at the UK's Cabinet Office. He's been in the job since April, having spent the previous 3 years as Director of Policy, Delivery and Private Office in the Business Department. So we'll first go to Zin, if we may.
Thank you, Matt, for the kind introduction, and thank you for inviting me to this webinar. Hello, everyone. It's 8 p.m. in Singapore, and it's good to see everyone. I have been working on public sector transformation at the Public Service Division for the last 2 years. And I came from 7 years in the healthcare sector, where I was trying to transform health services to be more responsive to our patients. So this is a topic that is very close to my heart, and I look forward to our dialogue later and learning new insights from our fellow panelists and also from the participants. Could I have the next slide, please? We have launched in Singapore a new phase of the public sector transformation some 2 years ago. And this is really in direct response to major changes in our operating landscape. So first is complexity. I think the challenges that we face as a public service are increasingly complex and multifaceted, right? And these challenges are traditional ways of organizing along vertical agency lines. Second, our operating environment is also changing a lot faster. And we find that our processes and our structures are sometimes strained as we try to shorten our policy to implementation cycle. Third, in an environment where money and manpower will be much tighter, we have to find ways to redeploy resources in a very agile manner, and most importantly, to be able to reskill and redeploy the people whom we have. Next slide. So what is our response? We start by transforming the way that we operate. We start with putting citizens and businesses at the center of our work and using that as our compass in a very fast-changing environment. And then we strive to be more responsive and agile by working on 3 areas. First, changing the way we work across the service, especially in transforming our operating model to be a lot more citizen-centric and digital. Second, to grow new skills, instincts, and mindsets in our people from leadership downwards. Third, relook the way we organize the public service, in particular, to move into a more matrix structure, building strong horizontal tech and people capabilities. So let me go and share each in turn. Next slide. First, in terms of the way we work, we engage our leadership and public officers to reframe the logic in terms of how we organize our work. So thus far, for example, in the area of service delivery, many of our services are largely organized along agency lines. And we expect the citizens to be like the planets, revolving around us as the sun, and they go from agency to get things done. We want to change that. We want to change this operating logic and wrap the services around citizens instead. So what we did was to start several citizen service journeys around key moments of life in a citizen's life course, and then seek to repackage the services around citizens at the key moments of their life, whether it is at the point of birth or even at the point of death. And we structure it. We put public service leaders, deputy secretaries, and chief executives to own and drive these journeys as journey owners, so that they can bash through the bureaucratic boundaries and integrate efforts. We then redesign and integrate processes and digitalize the services so that we can serve our citizens 24/7, better, faster, and around the clock. And for example, we have an app that integrates all services at the point of birth, and it's already used to register over 80% of births now at public hospitals. Next, similarly, we apply the same logic in terms of integrating services. Could I have the next slide? In our digital touch, in our physical touch points. So for citizens who are less confident of navigating the digital platforms, we have integrated over 200 services from across 15 agencies in a single physical touch point in a community to serve citizens who may need help. And through integration, we can also be able to string services together for them. So with the integration of the services, the time to serve citizens reduced and the citizen satisfaction went up. Next slide. We apply the same logic as well to serve businesses. And I just want to bring up this example of how to get a food license, you used to have to get in touch with 14 government touch points and fill up 845 fields in the forms. So we've pulled all 14 agencies together and we slashed the requirements and auto-populated the data fields in, and what we have at the end is actually a Go Business portal that serves as a one platform to serve businesses for licensing matters. Next, apart from reorganizing the way we structure our work, we are also introducing the idea of organizing around missions. So not just services and agency lines, but around missions, which means that missions can come up and go away with time. And a great example of that would be during COVID, where actually our key leaders were put in charge of driving key missions across various government agencies. For example, safe distancing, where there were many organizations actually coming together and under the leadership of one single leader to ensure that our safe management measures are well implemented on ground. Next. What we need to change is also our relationship with citizens. How to be more responsive to citizens will have to be influenced by the way we work with them and not just for them. So operating in such a complex environment, it is insufficient to just cook up policies and then retail them or communicate them. So we need and want to work alongside our citizens and businesses, almost, you know, as a parallel like the agile development approach in tech, to co-create solutions and then iterate and improve continuously with the citizens' feedback. Next. In the area of, the second area of adaptation is therefore the new skills and DNA in our workforce, because we are going to work very differently. So what matters is that the workforce skills and profile must change in tandem with this new operating philosophy and environment. So this year, we have introduced a new set of core competencies for all our officers, which emphasize new behaviors such as being able to work across as one public service and to work with citizens and businesses, and also to be able to learn and innovate along the way. Next. We are also building stronger system capabilities to support a more agile workforce. So we work with our public sector organizations to conduct strategic workforce planning, and that is to look ahead and identify the impact of business changes on our workforce skills, so that we can prepare individuals early to take on new skills and then to transit from one job to another. And to the individuals, we have career coaching. We have also a stronger system of structured job rotations meant to actually develop a stronger change agility in our offices. Next. And therefore, in order to achieve this, even the HR would have to grow new skills. So we have to step up to translate new policies and strategies into workforce plans. And our HR needs to learn how to manage a more diverse and nimble workforce. So for example, during COVID, just for safe management, we had a combination of public officers, impacted workers from the aviation sector joining us in the work, and we also had robotic dogs as part of our workforce. So increasingly new skills of HR to manage a more diverse and interesting mix of an agile workforce. Next. But of course, skills is just one part of it. What's important for change to happen, agility in organizations starts with agility in the minds of our people. So mindset is very important. So engagement of our leadership, we do that extensively, including through peer learning and learning circles where we get our CEOs to share how they actually manage to create an innovation culture within their organizations, and they learn from one another. Next. For the workforce at large, how do we instill restlessness, right? Is actually, we launched a movement called the Million Hours Challenge, which is actually to challenge all our officers, because you are there every day meeting customers, meeting citizens. You know exactly what is wrong. You know that form that doesn't need to be there. So we started an effort to get everyone to cut the number of hours through innovation. And thus far, actually, we have already saved over 5 million hours to date from ground up projects. Next. What is interesting though, and this is my last point, which is that the third area we need to change is the way we organize the public service internally. So ironically, agility comes from building stronger central shared capabilities and systems so that we can support all agencies to level up and let them be goal-free and be obsessed with meeting the needs of the citizens without having to repeat the same learning curve. So in the same way that we appoint service journey owners, we also identify leaders who are responsible for building strong functional capabilities. And these include things like corporate services, regulatory excellence, and so on. An example, going to the next slide, of our work in the HR functional leadership domain is actually to onboard all ministries and agencies into central HR and finance systems. And actually, we are on a multi-year effort to onboard statutory boards to software as a service, and the first 6 agencies has gone live on Workday this month. Okay, and that's the way that we are able to keep our agencies at the forefront of innovation. Next. In the same way, we are building a strong central tech stack so that agencies can accelerate their digitalization efforts while leveraging on the central tech infrastructure. And that includes also a stronger data architecture so that we can support more responsive data analysis and policy making through good data that's being shared across the public sector. Next slide. Last but not least, to spur us to change faster and be more responsive, we need to stare down at a clearer set of scorecards so that we know whether we are changing fast enough. So in the digitalization area, for example, we have set key indicators that we stare down at, including government to employee, government to customers score, as well as the digital maturity index of each of our public sector organizations. So next slide. In short, actually to move towards a more fast-changing world, we are transforming workforce and organization structure to be more responsive. And that brings me to the end of the sharing. I look forward to learning from all of you on how we can do better this journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sin. Amazing range of things going on in Singapore. If we can go to Alex, please.
Well, thank you very much. And just give you a heads up, my laptop has literally done that thing where it says it wants to do a software update. So fingers crossed it will hold off. So thank you, Matt, and hello, and thank you for joining us. Thank you to Global Government Forum for hosting this webinar. I'm Alex Richards from PA Consulting, and I just want to spend a few minutes talking about how the public sector can gain the adaptive edge in order to prepare for the future. Now, as we know, public sector organisations are facing a multitude of challenges and threats that are testing organisations and capabilities that were built in a world that operated at a slower pace and had less complexity and interconnectedness. It's our experience at PA that to address this, organisations must focus on accelerating insight-led decision-making, stepping up the pace, and instilling a permanent positive restlessness. Whether it's driven by enabling technologies or strategic shocks, we exist in an environment where disruptive change is now the norm and the only certainty. This narrative is not new, yet governments around the world have not yet made the transition to become the organisations that they need to be. It's only in the past decade that we've experienced the information explosion that makes our awareness of change so much more acute than it has ever been. To compound the situation, malicious groups are utilising the disruptive changes and the lag in our response to their advantage through the likes of terrorism and organised crime. I want to explore the need to instill a permanent but positive restlessness. This isn't easy to achieve. It's complex and multifaceted. It means having the right leadership, culture, governance and processes to be able to pivot quickly. At the same time, organisations need a sense of who they are and what purpose and what their purpose is. For this to be possible, adaptability has to be built into the fabric of the organisation, both strategically and operationally. While this transformation is essential, it's a wicked problem with no easy answers. We have, however, identified 3 key elements to successfully and sustainably address the challenge. The first is embedding a mindset of constant adaptability. While leaders increasingly view transformation as an ongoing need rather than a one-off event, many still struggle to make it a reality. Agile processes are often implemented without addressing the structural and cultural factors that are key for success. At the same time, leaders fall back on old habits to try and deliver big bang initiatives. In their search to become adaptive, they end up implementing bolt-on solutions to legacy, thus creating flawed systems with integration issues. While it's complex to replace systems that continue to be core to operations, it's important to find a way to balance ongoing delivery with an ambition and the headroom for change. The litmus test for leaders is whether they can maintain an open-minded outlook and be guided by insights from data-driven analysis to quickly pivot without hesitation. Becoming adaptive calls for the ability to continuously make active interventions to anticipate and respond to changes and speed up the pace of evolution. It's not just about having the right systems, processes and people in place now, but anticipating whether they'll be right in 6 to 12 months' time. Capabilities need to be frequently assessed to understand the value they're adding to current business priorities and to ensure they're capable of meeting future demands. The second component is rewiring the culture of how organisations think and work. Becoming an adaptive organisation requires focus on empowering people, creating dynamic working environments, and helping collaboration happen. Achieving this needs effective leadership at various levels of the organisation and adoption of the right kind of values and behaviours across the workforce. Adaptive organisations encourage their staff to explore, apply and share learning from other organisations and sectors to help their own organisation operate more effectively. While we have been working with clients to become more adaptive over recent years, COVID has given no choice but to adapt and overcome. It has disrupted traditional boundaries and demonstrated that organisations can have confidence in their staff to innovate and deliver in dynamic and self-organising teams. The focus moving forward for adaptive leaders needs to be on enabling multifunction working. Meaningful collaboration across functions and specialisms lets organisations blend capabilities to become more than the sum of their parts. With the now emerging distributed ways of working, leaders have a role to encourage discussion on the best form of collaboration, removing any unnecessary barriers. Through widespread adoption of these ways of working, cross-functional and inter-organisational collaboration will become default across the public sector as it operates in an integrated ecosystem. The final component is creating a framework for flexibility. Shifting organisational culture towards adaptability will need organisations to ensure actions of preserving the advantages of the strong strategic centre that characterises many public sector organisations. While radical change is required, it can't be at the expense of the long-standing and ongoing requirement for these organisations to focus on their purpose while compliant with stringent regulatory and legislative regimes. Instead, the process of becoming adaptive calls for a hybrid approach between stability and agility, where organisations can rely on the tenets and foundations that have stood them well over time, while activating, or in some cases, scaling the benefits of small, innovative teams. This means moving from traditional concepts of strategy as detailed long-term planning exercises, aiming to provide certainty, to a concept that embraces change, exploiting principle-based strategy to support decision-making as changes occur and ensuring continual strategic fit with the organisation's purpose. By taking an approach that combines the central support while moving more responsibility to the edge, leaders can continue delivering on today's business in a controlled way while having the flexibility within a framework to prepare for tomorrow's. In conclusion, this transformation is a significant undertaking, but is critical to the success of the public sector. There is a renewed imperative for public sector organisations to respond by becoming every bit as adaptable as the challenges and threats they face. An inability to match the speed of the challenges and threats risks our society, our security, and our prosperity. Since the start of the year, leaders in the international public sector have adapted and adapted quickly. The key now is to constructively learn from the failures and quickly build on the successes to ensure that the public sector has the best possible posture for the future. Well, thank you, Matt.
Thanks very much indeed, Alex. Yes, and we'll explore what that looks like a bit more in the questions, hey? But first, let's hear from Caleb.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you all for joining. Really good to hear from my fellow panelists, and it really reinforces, I think, the value of events like today. It reminds us what there is to learn from other places. Lots that resonates in both what Alex and what Zin have said, and lots for us to learn from. And I hope that as we go into the discussion, some other points might come out from other places that we can draw on. So I'm going to just start by saying a little bit about the context we face in the UK, which I think echoes the somewhat stark title of this session, but I'm also going to talk about where opportunities lie. I then want to say what we see as some of the big things that we want to tackle in the UK reform programme that we're just setting out on. And finally, I'm going to conclude with some elements of the how we're going about it. So, you know, just for context, to rehearse a bit of that, we've obviously had a turbulent few years and frankly a scramble as the civil service to get to grips with a range of real challenges associated with leaving the EU and taking back control of aspects of policy and delivery that haven't been done in Westminster for some time. And that's obviously been against a background that's often been characterised by real political drama and uncertainty at points. It's required whole new departments created and shut down once they've done their work, transfers of staff across the service, new ways of working, real change. We then look ahead at some of the big and important ambitions that the government has. For example, levelling up the UK economy to deal with the big regional economic imbalances that have persisted for decades, or reaching net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And you know, to succeed at these vital goals, we need to change and adapt how we work. You know, in the latter case, adapt to survive is not an exaggeration at all. And of course, then we've got, like everywhere else, the COVID-19 pandemic to contend with. And that experience, difficult though it is actually an incredible catalyst for reform, we're finding. It's a real demonstration, of course, of the importance of good public administration. But it's also shown us just how much change is possible, whether that's working at home or things we've done in the UK, for example, in the first few weeks of lockdown in that strange period. DWP staff managed to process 6 times the number that they're used to processing of universal credit claims, over 1.8 million, or HMRC, the Revenue and Customs Agency colleagues, designing often from their spare rooms and testing and launching a job retention scheme, which we've never had before in the UK. So just a couple of examples. Of course, it also adds renewed weight to our need to tackle the other frustrating side of the civil service, and I'm going to say more about that shortly. But the final bit of context that I can't leave unsaid is that this is obviously not a greenfield site. Of course, there's other countries to learn from, but also in the UK, we've been doing this since the 1850s with Northcote Trevelyan, or Francis Maud in the 2010s, and it's really important that we look at that, learn those lessons, which we've been really committed to doing. Now, I mentioned the idea of opportunity, and for me, this feels like a really unique moment where change is possible. The issues I spoke of before demand it. We've also got real political interest in these questions, and you really need that to make a difference in the world we operate in. So that is a crucial ingredient. And I've found, since I've been doing this job over the last 4 or 5 months, a surprising amount of consensus about what we need to do and what we need to change when I talk to civil servants at all levels, to ministers, to the people we work with and for in the wider public service and in business and communities across the country. So I'm going to turn now to some of those points, some of those things that I think there's a reasonable consensus around. I'm going to talk about them in three blocks. First, what we've been calling great people. Second, new ideas. And third, better results for citizens, which is, of course, what this is all about. And it's great to hear Zin talk about what they're doing on that front in Singapore. So in terms of great people, I mean, it is, of course, the civil service is a people business. That is what's at the heart of it. It's no accident that we start with that. But we think we need to be better at valuing and building deep expertise, and not just in commercial and digital skills that we've talked about a lot, but also in the kind of deep policy knowledge that we need to solve some of the really tricky problems that we face as a country. And linked to that is keeping people, in some cases, in roles for longer, whether that is to deliver, big, maybe £1 billion projects, or whether it is to see through policy reform and spend more time at their kind of peak productivity. Another thing I'll just mention in that space of great people is our push to be more connected and more representative of the people we serve. So in terms of policy roles, senior policy roles, still 80% of those are based in London. And that's a really unhealthy imbalance, and something that we are determined to change. And it's one where the recent experience of remote working helps enormously. in demonstrating what can be achieved. The next section then of things we're looking to shift the dial on, we've termed new ideas, but it's about innovation, it's about digital, and it's about data. And there's huge opportunities there. And again, inspiration from Singapore. We've made huge progress over the last decade, but I don't think we've kept pace with progress elsewhere. So I think that's an area where we will be really redoubling our efforts. And then I think we'll talk more in this session about innovation, but unless we can kind of shift, unless we can innovate, we're not going to shift from this equilibrium. And I think in Michael Gove's Cabinet Office Minister here, in his lecture at Ditchley in June, which some of you will have read, he spoke really powerfully about the imperative to experiment, to test, and to learn. And I think that's really at the heart of the program that we're developing. And then finally, in terms of bringing that together to deliver better results for the citizen, we've got to get better at delivering our big projects and programs. It's a long-standing challenge. I think we know what is needed, and by and large, it's just making sure the investment is there and the discipline to get things right at the outset. And then a couple of other things, and again, that kind of resonate with points that my other panelists made, but operating as what we call one civil service, so working effectively across departmental boundaries, but then also across other boundaries with our partners in the private sector, in the wider public sector, and indeed with citizens. And we need to build the culture and the infrastructure to do that. And of course, we also need an effective centre of government at the heart of this. So really close working between Number 10, Cabinet Office, and the Treasury on this and much else. I said that my final segment was going to be on how we're going about this, and there's just three things there that I want to highlight before I finish. And the first is that this program relies on politicians and civil servants working hand in hand to do this. It can't be seen as something that's being done by outside forces or be completely disconnected from political buy-in on the other hand. And it was really important when we launched a discussion of this at a big civil service event called Civil Service Live Online, happened during lockdown, so it was all digital, but we had 32,000 people take part in that over 2 days. And when we launched it, it was Alex Chisholm, Permanent Secretary at the Cabinet Office and Chief Operating Officer for the Civil Service on one hand, and Michael Gove, Cabinet Office Minister on the other hand, facilitated by a senior Treasury official and taking questions from staff. And I think that sort of embodies how we want to go about this. The second thing is that there are absolutely tons of people across the civil service who are hungry for change, who are frustrated by some things that hold back their potential to make a difference for citizens. And what we're doing just has to unlock that passion and energy. And for that reason, we've been working to establish a bottom-up network of champions across the civil service, and we've got more to do to build and use that. And then the third final bit of the how is that we recognise that following through on our commitments and making them stick is really 90% of what's needed on civil service reform. It's not what we say, it's what we actually manage to do and to embed for the long term. So this is going to be a programme of work. We're not under any illusions that we're going to fix everything in the next 3 months or even the next 6 months. We're going to look over at least the Parliament and what we can do quarter by quarter. So look, I'm going to stop there. I think that's an overview of what we're trying to achieve, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions and hopefully hearing some insights as well. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Caleb. And thank you, all of you, for those contributions. We will go to audience questions shortly. We've got some really good ones coming in, so keep them coming. But first, I just want to get everybody's perspectives on a couple of key points. Firstly, what are the key obstacles to making the changes that are required, and how can we clear them? I mean, perhaps we go to Zin. What as you've made progress on all the points you described, what are the biggest sort of structural or cultural challenges, and how have you got around them? You're on mute there, Zin.
Okay, I think one of the bigger challenges that we face has got to do with sort of bringing the people along. It's a large public service that we have, of course, not in relation, of course, to UK, but we have a big workforce, and being able to move everyone along, it's, I think, one of the bigger challenges that we face. And you would have people who have been in a certain job for a long time. So sort of that almost emotional connection to how things are. And I think that encouraging people to see things differently, be open to trying out things that have not been done before, and to take on new skills and to try new jobs. I think that is a challenge that is an ongoing challenge that we have to overcome. And I think part of that is related to this tension that we always face, which is that we've got 50 years of great success, it's very, very difficult to say, yeah, but let's fix it before it's broke. That I think it's emotionally so difficult. And so actually I have a mascot when I talk to my public officers about public sector transformation. It's always a little frog. It says that it's time to jump because the environment has changed a lot. So I think this it's easier to start with a clean slate, but that tension between preserving the success and things that have worked and proven to work, and forsaking that and trying out things that may not work, that I think it's a huge emotional struggle that many of us have.
Thank you. Alex, in your experience of working in departments, what's sort of the obstacles you've encountered, and how do you get around them?
So I think there's two key themes. One is, again, on the people side of it. So we've been doing some leadership training with senior leadership teams across some of our government clients. We're talking at directorate level here. On adaptive leadership for the future, and the consistent feedback that we're getting is around almost imposter syndrome. People, you've got to remember that we are moving into a paradigm that is new and different, that nobody's really done at scale before. People don't feel qualified or experienced to lead it, although they know that they have to. And accountability and control is another one that is another theme that consistently is coming up. People don't feel as if they necessarily have the resources, or the control over the resources, or are empowered to be able to make the changes. We're talking about some significant changes that they have to make across departments, how the workforce operates, how they're engaged. And there's a lot to it, and it is big and scary. So the people side and leadership side is a really big one. The second one is around technology. In a lot of countries have a significant investment in legacy IT. Some of the clients I'm working with are spending 60, 70, even 80% of their IT budgets on feeding and watering the legacy estate, which gives them very little headroom to be able to invest in the new and different things that they need to be able to do to enable the world that we're talking about. And when you have a choice about keeping services running for today, or reducing the level of service that you can provide so you can invest in the future, that's a really difficult decision to have to make. So I think that overcoming those two things around making sure that people feel equipped to be able to take on the challenges, but given some of the room to be able to unlock some of the challenges that come with the legacy that has been invested.
Great, thanks. And Caleb, kind of what obstacles are you anticipating?
Well, I think the first one that I would that I'm very conscious of is just competing demands on people's time and resources. You know, there's a lot going on at the moment. There's a lot to deliver, and you know, there's a lot of interest and support for this. And I think right now there's recognition that this is a sort of necessary foundation to achieve, as I was saying earlier, the ambitions that we've got. But keeping up the momentum and the engagement in face of, you know, all those other incoming things, I think, you know, is something that I worry about as an obstacle. And then the other one, which is kind of different in nature, is just, you know, some of the things I was running through there are quite ingrained in the culture. And culture is a hard thing to shift, and you've got to, you know, you've got to go at that from multiple directions, and it takes time. So that would be my second point.
Great, thank you. We've got loads of questions coming in, so I'm actually going to just cut my questions down to two. I will go to my second, which actually maps quite neatly onto one that's come in from Leo Schwartz. So Leo, if you don't think I've addressed it, then write again. But there's to encourage innovation and intelligent risk taking, we need civil servants to be confident that they will be supported and protected when those risks don't pay off. If, on the other hand, civil servants end up taking the blame for other people's mistakes, and we have seen some vivid examples of that recently, then they're incentivized to minimize every risk and to pass on every decision to somebody else. Does effective reform require behaviour change among ministers as well as civil servants? And I will go to Caleb on that one first. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, look, like when I was speaking earlier, I mentioned the Michael Gove lecture on this, and like I said, I think he spoke really powerfully on it and on what it requires from ministers. And I think it's a really, I would say this, but it's a really good lecture, and it's well worth having a read of if you haven't. And I guess what I would say about, you know, risk and innovation is it's not completely linear. You know, sometimes, quite often in fact, you know, governments will do things which are kind of quite big leaps, and there's quite a lot of risk involved. So, you know, and if you actually step back and tried a few different things first to find out what really worked before going big, you might reduce the risk. I think the most important thing, and this is about, you know, this is about the kind of relationship with ministers as well, is just being really upfront and explicit at the beginning about what you're doing and what you expect to happen, and then putting in the right processes to manage it well. I mean, one of the things that people worry about, you know, ministers and civil servants alike, is being, you know, getting a very difficult time from our kind of parliamentary select committees, and where they really go to town is where they can see, you know, examples of things, you know, whether it's experimental or not, just not being managed in a really disciplined way. So I think, you know, there are great examples in places like HMRC where there has been much more of a kind of culture of, you know, trying things, learning from them, constantly improving. A lot of that's kind of below the radar actually, but has delivered really good results. And I think there's a lot more of that that we can do, and get ministers behind alongside civil servants.
Okay, thanks. Alex, is this a sort of a problem you recognise, and what solutions do you have?
Well, I spent a lot of time working in and with law enforcement, and I guess, you know, it's already in a high risk, high pace environment. There is a lot of innovation that goes on all the time. I guess in my experience and what I'm dealing with, people have that space. There are a lot of checks and balances to make sure that that things are going to happen in the right way, and therefore they're going to succeed. So I guess it is doable. I guess the question for me is, where else do we need to and do we want to innovate, and how do we replicate the successes that we see? There's a lot of innovation that does happen in the public sector, and you very rarely hear about things that go well because they just happen seamlessly. For me, it's about how do we learn from those, and how do we bring it out, and how do we elevate it and celebrate it that bit more, to make something of it.
And Zin, how in Singapore do you make people feel safe and secure to take those kind of risks? Oh, you're on mute again, Zin.
We get asked this question a lot, but I find that there's so much scope to innovate. You don't really always have to choose a very high profile, high risk project to innovate in a hugely public way. But there's like a million ways that you can innovate to improve the citizens' lives every day. And that is the kind of innovation and working with citizens that we are encouraging. And we find that first, of course, we need to have some skills in terms of risk management, but one of the ways of managing it is actually to find areas where you can co-create with the citizen. Because, you know, we are in this together. And, you know, you contributed 50% of the idea, I contributed 50, maybe it succeeded 80%, but yay, you know, it's our effort. And for the 20% it didn't succeed, yeah, let's try to iterate and do better. And we have been at this together since day one. So we find there's a lot of potential, a lot of energy in that, and there are many areas of innovation which really isn't that high risk at all. Yeah. So there's a lot that you can do without starting with this question. Yeah.
Okay. Right, lots of audience questions. Well, there's one quite interesting one from Michelle Allen. Caleb, you mentioned working across departmental boundaries. I agree there are huge benefits to be had from interoperability, but in practice, execution is really difficult. Will civil service reform help to create the levers to make this easier, which is budget and governance? So I think this is around cross-departmental programs. And then where you need shared accountability, responsibilities, budget and governance systems.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, and that is absolutely in the scope of what we're looking at. I mean, look, we've got a spending review coming up in the UK. That is an opportunity to do some of that. And you know, we're talking to the Treasury about that, and you know, they have a long-standing interest actually in those kind of shared outcomes. So I'm hopeful about progress on that front. And then I think there are, and I sort of just mentioned very briefly, the kind of tools and infrastructure that support that kind of ability to work more seamlessly across those boundaries. Yes, some of it's about governance, some of it's about budget, but it's also about, to some extent, it's been easier to work, you know, wherever you are in the country. In recent months, but we've had to work hard to make sure that, you know, each different department's bit of video conferencing software can work with the others, and we've made a lot of progress on that. It's still not perfect, and the same applies to other platforms for, you know, collaboration on documents and so on. And so I think there's a lot we can do there, and you know, as we're, you know, as we return to the workplace, the ability to work in different, you know, offices together, not departmental silos, are part of that, and it all helps to build a culture where we see each other as, you know, part of one team, working in what is a complex system to solve those system-wide challenges. And I'd just go back to emphasising as well what I said before, and I think again it came out in what Zin has been saying, is we can't just think of it's about, you know, working with another department. Equally important is about how we work with, you know, local authorities or businesses, depending on what the issue is, and indeed how we engage you know, citizens in being part of the solution. And again, we'll probably come onto this because it features in other questions, but that kind of, you know, user-centered design and systems approach to thinking about policy, I think is really important. So we're not just saying, you know, what are we doing here in policy making? We're working towards, you know, publishing a piece of legislation or a green paper or something. We're trying to achieve an outcome in a complex environment, and that's going to require you know, lots of different actions from different people that need to be coordinated in the right way. I'll let others come in, but it just takes us back to the conversation. You know, if you just focus on governance and budgets, it takes us back to the conversation we were having before the session started, Matt, about, you know, machinery of government changes. And, you know, you could, how we work is, you know, as important, because if you can just end up moving the silo into a different place, or you just change the lines, but you create potentially some new problems.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, Zin, Michelle has a sort of a portion of the question for you as well. It seems that Singapore is or has tackled this to some extent. So she's wondering if there are also insights from Singapore about how you can support better, create cross-departmental programs and projects where the governance and the budgets and that are not obstacles to delivery.
I wouldn't say that the budgets are a huge obstacle, but we have certainly tried to encourage the cross-agency collaboration by sort of prioritizing or encouraging projects for funding in the funding area. So we're more encouraging in terms of funding of projects as interagency. So that's a plus point if you want more money, that it is an interagency project. Second is we have come to the point where we are looking at or experimenting with assigning clearer leadership responsibilities that is in a matrix structure. Yeah. So if you are a senior public service leader, you have certain vertical responsibilities, but you also have certain horizontal responsibilities. But I think what really worked, and we worked on it for years for that culture to shift. And I think we felt ourselves between SARS and COVID-19, that for COVID-19, it's almost was a testament of how we have succeeded in building this one public service spirit, because everybody just sprung into action, and we have thousands of officers say, okay, I'll do that. I've never done it before, it's in another ministry, but I'll contribute, I will volunteer. And I think it cannot run away from the hard work of consistent culture building. So bringing leaders together in a regular manner, drumming in one public service at different levels of the public sector is what we have consistently invested in the many years past. And that, I think, is the most lasting thing to do if you want to break the silos.
Yeah, fair enough. And Alex, I wonder if you've seen, I mean, both Caleb and Zin have made the point that actually, you know, this is partly a cultural thing, but even if people want to do it, sometimes they do need the right tools. What sort of approaches have you seen that have been effective in helping those cross-departmental programs work?
Yeah, so I think the two of the key things there are having the identity and the culture. It's, you know, everybody wants to identify with where they're homed and the organisation they're from, but also the initiative or the programme that they're actually working on. And it's trying to bring the best of those worlds together is really important. And the best experiences that I've had is where we've had a really strong emphasis on establishing that that identity and culture right at the beginning, and understanding what everybody has to bring to the table. Because often it's not because people don't necessarily want to work together that's the issue. It's just that people aren't really clear about what everybody's explicit roles are and how they're going to work together. So actually starting off those either initiatives or the pieces of work where you're laying those foundations out, and you're starting to legitimize people's concerns, because people always will have concerns when they start working with new and different groups, and working out ways to overcome those in a constructive way. Now, if you can do that and start creating that environment where people can start exploring what everybody else has to bring to the table, you start building up a really high-performing team, and you can then start delivering things that are difficult, that are complex, that are complicated. But the focus is now on delivering that outcome and the mission. And I think what Zim was talking about earlier about having that view on the end-to-end mission, it takes it away from the organisation and brings it towards what we're delivering as a collective, and that is something that everybody can get behind. It's that single agenda and that single purpose for that team. And though the programs I've worked on where we've done that, where we had to bring lots of different teams from different organisations together, they've always been successful. And we've had some you have some really difficult conversations at times about the deliveries, but you get through them because you have put that groundwork in.
Yeah. There's another question which is linked, and I'm sure there'll be culture aspects to this one too, but there's also another technical and tools aspects from Alison Ring. How can you harness the power of data cross-departmentally to help modernise the civil service? For example, by having a cross-government data portal so that individuals and businesses only file information once, and departments can access the evidence to support or to create evidence-based policy. The UK data strategy has, of course, just been published. Zin, can you just outline for us what are the principles or the understandings that support data sharing across Singapore agencies and departments? On mute. You're on mute, Zin.
Yeah, I think legislation-wise, with the Public Sector Governance Act, that sort of says that it's we should be sharing data across the public service. So that's sort of the basic. In terms of the citizen information, we have launched this thing called My Info. So there's a central point. So whether you are government agencies or even private sector, you could then have a single source of the citizens' data that's pre-populated. So we use My Info quite a bit in terms of then underpinning a lot of the public services, so that our citizens don't need to re-enter the same things all over again. Yeah.
I mean, I think, as I recall, there's legislation, but relatively recent, which says that departments essentially have to share data. Yeah. That's the basic assumption behind it all, which obviously makes this much easier. Caleb, which bits of the new data strategy are going to be most helpful here? Because there's some firm principles set out about cross-departmental data standards and an organisation that will kind of monitor and police them and check departmental data strategies, and some kind of a central sharing data hub. But what's you're on mute, by the way. What's the key? How will they support what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think in terms of what I care about in the program, we've got to take it back to that benefit for citizens, right? And it is the sort of thing that Alison raised in her question. How can we make it easier for people and quicker for people to access services, so that if they've already given the information, they don't have to spend time inputting it again, if we know it. And I think that's also the way to get people's buy-in to this. And I think the data strategy is good at sort of starting to set out the things we need to get right in order for people to have confidence in it. And I guess, there are other aspects to this as well. There is what we can do, to improve some of our, for example, our legacy IT systems that still exist in, parts of the public service. And those are, they're not just frustrating for, individual citizens or businesses to use and take too much of their time to deal with, but they're also frustrating for the civil servants that operate them. And again, they could be putting more of their time into kind of higher value added activity than grappling with stuff that's out of date and maybe insecure. So those are just a couple of things that I would see as important in this.
Okay. And Alex, when you're looking at how we build new services and provide better tools for public servants, what are those key sort of capabilities or changes you would like to see to support a more adaptive civil service on data?
So data is a really interesting one. It's at the heart of almost everything that we do these days. It always has been, but it's even more so today. Being honest, I don't think that that we collectively truly actually understand data. It is a difficult concept to get your head around. What's the difference between data, information, knowledge, insight, and wisdom? They are different things, but we use the terms interchangeably. Trying to understand what we want to get out of our use of data, what questions are we trying to answer, how are we going to use it, what are our analytical strategies for the data that we've collected, how long are we going to keep it. These are all really difficult things, particularly when you put it in the context of legislation, where we need to maintain people's privacy and we need to be proportionate with what we're doing, and how we're treating their data and what it's being used for. I think the only way to be able to deal with the quantity of data and the demand from public for the services is to build in a lot more automation. I think, as Caleb was saying, we have a lot of legacy and we have a lot of mandrolic processes that we could automate, but we need to build people's confidence in that automation. People will start talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning, which have a lot to add into what we do and how we do it. But how do we put the checks and balances around that? How do we make sure that the legislation and the regulations that we need to comply with are enforced, and we're doing that in the right way? It only takes one mistake to reduce public confidence in services, and we need to move at pace, but build confidence one step at a time.
Thanks. I will want to put one final question, of my own. So I'm just going to ask one more audience question. Fairly short answers. This is from Anna Edwards. I believe a move to more remote working will also improve diversity in the civil service workforce. I've been unable to apply for jobs in central government as I can't be in London every day due to a disability. Has the link here been made, and is there a drive to learn from organisations that have been using remote working for many years? I mean, of course, every organisation is now then using remote working rather dramatically, and yet we see, there seems to be political pressure for people to go back into the office in order, I don't know, to support central London property markets. This has nothing to do with the civil service doing the job which they're hired and paid to do. So So the key point then is a key part of the changes we need to make, changing the way that people work so that they are encouraged and supported and given the tools to be able to do the job in the way which makes most sense, and not about measuring their success and whether they deliver rather than whether they are sitting at their desk. I mean, Zin, how's that agenda look in Singapore? And I'll remind you about the button. Yes.
Yes. So indeed, I think we are, at least for the workforce side of the house, we actually saw the potential of telecommuting in terms of getting us a much more diverse and inclusive workforce. And this is an area that we're quite excited about. And we will be looking at what are the other jobs which doesn't really require people to come into the office in such a high intensity, and how we can be a lot more inclusive in terms of who then becomes also part of the workforce. So I think that's quite liberating, and we're very excited by that opportunity. At the same time, I think we are sort of thinking about the post-COVID new normal, and I would say that we might be looking at telecommuting as a feature, but I think what it means is that we've got to also then teach supervisors and officers new skills in order to thrive in a new way of new environment of working. Because I think most of the time in COVID, when we impose circuit breaker or a lockdown, as you call it, we are using the same work processes and culture, just sort of using Zoom or Skype. I think what we need to quite quickly figure out and to change is actually how to even morph our processes. How do we refresh our approach to performance management? And how can we actually leverage on this new environment to actually have a much closer talent marketplace in the public sector? So these are the ways that we are thinking of looking at policies, looking at the use of technology to actually also change the way we operate, not just bring wholesale the way that we are working and just put it on Skype or put it on Zoom. And we haven't found all the answers to that, but that's something that we're seriously working on. And then our office spaces, that doesn't become, I mean, they can be reformed, they can be transformed to actually innovation and incubation hubs, where people across the public service can come together and sort of innovate and try new things. Because that you don't really need people sitting in a physical space for work now. So these are some of the ways that we are thinking about. And of course, with it, new tech tools in project management, in seamless working across different parts of public service. I think these are the areas that we are actively studying and working out new interventions right now.
Thank you. Alex, I'd ask you if you see a strong connection between the principles around kind of remote and flexible working and the thing you focus on around creating more adaptive organisations.
Yeah, so I think it's about getting the balance right. There are huge benefits in being able to work from home in a much more distributed way. Before COVID, I was literally flying around the world for the previous 18 months. So being locked down and having to stay at home was a benefit for the first couple of months, to be honest. But there is the need for people to actually spend some time together as well. So one of the projects I'm working on at the moment, it's actually really important for us to get together for at least a day a week so that we can spend time just engaging face to face. You lose a lot in communication by working remotely. And there's that piece around how do you create those high performing teams by giving people enough space so that they can be creative and innovate in their own time. But again, we also create and innovate when we come together. It's about getting that balance right. That I think is really important. I don't think there is everybody that I've spoken to doesn't have an appetite to be back in the office 5 days a week. But at the same time, everybody sees the benefit of spending maybe 2 or 3 days a week, sort of physically in the same place.
Yeah, thank you. And Caleb.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Look, I mean, we've all learned different ways of operating, and it's been a revelation to me and to many others. But I don't think the office is completely dead, as both my co-panelists were saying. There's definite advantages of getting together, but it's amazing what you can achieve in the virtual world. I started a new job in April. I built a team from scratch, most of whom I didn't meet until quite recently. Some I still haven't. So, you know, things can be done, but getting together in a kind of physical environment is useful, and we're going to have to work out, as Zin was saying, what the right kind of hybrid model is and how to operate that properly. Just to go back to the kind of original question though about the connection with diversity and has that been made? It absolutely has, and I think the combination of more remote working plus our push to move some roles out of London and the southeast, we see as very connected to having a civil service that has a greater range of perspectives in it. You know, people from more diverse backgrounds, but in all respects, not just the ones that we focused on in recent years, but also thinking about kind of cognitive diversity, socioeconomic background as well, and that kind of connection to different places and understanding of the challenges that they face. And so we're going to work hard to make sure that we deliver that as we make that change.
Thank you. Right, we have just 3 minutes. I've got one question, so you got 1 minute each on the question. Could you just name one key change that will help support this agenda, enable civil services to become more nimble and flexible and responsive? Can be a change in any field, from culture to HR, leadership to legislation, systems, processes. One key change. Zin? Unmute. Zin, yeah.
Leadership, transformational leadership. I think it's absolutely critical. It sets the tone.
Yeah, fair enough. Alex?
Well, I was going to go for leadership as my number one. I'll go for my number two, which is around how we pivot the IT sector and the technology sector, particularly working with the public sector. I think there's a large transformation in that space with the IT and technology suppliers. I think they have got used to working in a particular way for decades, for a very long time, and how we engage and how they are contracted, innovation in that space and transformation in that space, I think would make a massive difference.
Thank you. Okay, then.
For me, my big one is always going to be that culture of innovation. There's a reason why we talked about it a lot. I think that is the thing that allows us to kind of shift to a different equilibrium and to have a kind of embedded agenda of kind of continuous improvement. But sadly, there's not an innovation lever that we can pull. It's really complicated. But that's my top focus.
Great. Well, thank you all three of you for your contributions and for answering all my questions so fully. I hope that you found it interesting and that everybody out there has found it useful. Thank you also to PA Consulting as our knowledge partner, and thanks to everyone for watching. We will shortly, everybody who signed up to view, we will send you a link to the on-demand video so you can watch back. The slides will be available, and we'll publish an article setting out the key points as well. Meanwhile, thank you everybody very much. See you next time. Finish on time. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.